Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session on free trade zones, how to combat illicit trade and counterfeiting. My name is Fanta Punch. I'm a partner at M. Hammersmith and Company in Trinidad and Tobago, member of INTA's Anti-Counterfeiting Committee, and leader of the committee's Free Trade Zone project team. I will be your moderator for today's session. I'm very honored to be moderating this fantastic webinar today with such esteemed speakers. Before we get started, on behalf of INTA, I would like to quickly thank Muriel FZO and the World Free Zone organization for their partnership on this dialogue. I also take the opportunity to thank Tiffany Fo of INTA for all her hard work in helping to organize today's session. I just want to briefly share with you, as we start, some of the work INTA has been doing in the area of free trade zones. For those of you who may not know, the International Trademark Association, INTA, is a global association of brand owners and professionals dedicated to supporting trademarks and related intellectual property rights to foster consumer trust, economic growth, and innovation. INTA is headquartered in New York City and has an on-the-ground presence in an increasing number of countries. The membership comprises of nearly 6,500 organizations from 185 countries. And these organizations represent more than 34,350 professionals, including brand owners, small and medium-sized enterprises, law firms, and nonprofits. And the community also extends to government agencies, professors, and law students. Counterfeiting is one of INTA's main priorities. Next slide, please. How large is the global threat of counterfeiting is a real question, I think, that needs to be answered. In February 2017, INTA, along with Business Action to Stop Counterfeiting and Piracy, released a report from Frontier Economics that was entitled The Economic Impacts of Counterfeiting and Piracy, which sought to quantify the global value of counterfeiting and piracy and related economic and social costs. That study found that in 2013, the estimated value of international and domestic trade in counterfeit and pirated goods was a staggering 1.37 trillion euro. The wider economic and social cost was calculated at 1,095 billion euro at that time, which included fiscal losses, the cost of crime, and displacement of legitimate economic activity. In 2022, which is literally around the corner, the total estimated value of counterfeit and pirated goods is projected to reach an astounding 2.3 to 3.42 trillion euro, and the number of jobs set to be lost due to counterfeiting and piracy is expected to reach upwards of 5.4 million jobs in 2022. Next slide. Anti-counterfeiting remains a top priority for this organization, for INTA, and its main priority issues surround customs and border measures, criminal enforcement, online counterfeiting. And INTA spends quite a fair amount of time focused on key policy development and advocacy initiatives such as commenting on legislation, hosting roundtables and policy dialogues such as these, engaging with policymakers and delivering customs training. With a network of more than 300 volunteer members around the world, its Anti-Counterfeiting Committee leads the association's enforcement activities to address the supply of counterfeit goods occurring in the world. One of the topics that the committee has been focused on is the issue of counterfeiters taking advantage of free trade zones to transship counterfeit goods. And with over 3,000 free trade zones globally, regulation of these zones are quite imperative to the protection of intellectual property rights, notwithstanding that we understand that free trade zones improve economic growth for host countries, increase foreign investment, employment, and innovation. They have unfortunately become increasingly vulnerable to a wide range of abuses. So to help combat this, INTA has set up a working group dedicated to monitoring enforcement in the zones and providing recommendations on how stakeholders involved can improve the ecosystem. Next slide. This slide just shows it just shows INTA's recommendations or resolution that it has set out. And these recommendations are meant to be in harmony with past consultations and global guidance that INTA has submitted comments to previously, such as the OECD and the WCO. Can we show the next slide? It's just to give you a sense of what INTA's involvement has been. And these recommendations will be completed in the coming months, and more, there will be more information about the INTA's resolution as well as the submissions that are available on the website. So maybe we could show the next slide, which just shows briefly the what some of those submissions are. I will leave it there for now. Thank you very much for your time on that. We have some excellent speakers who will be presenting case studies today on best practices on enforcement in these zones. Before we go to our first speaker, I just want to take a second to share some housekeeping information. So we're encouraging all our attendees today to use the Q&A feature during the webinar and place any questions you may have there. We are going to do our best to answer some of those questions where we can, and we do also have a Q&A, a short question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So we may not get to everyone, but we will do our best to do so. And just to let you know that the webinar is being recorded today. So with that, I want to move quickly on to our first speaker, Dr. Mohan Guruswamy, Chief Knowledge Officer of the World Free Zones Organization. Dr. Guruswamy has over 2 decades of experience in the areas of strategic planning and organizational development. Prior to his time at Executive Council of Abu Dhabi, he worked for DP World and was responsible for strategic planning and business performance management functions for ports, free zones, and customs. He is a well-recognized domain expert in the field of special economic zones and the author of 2 books, as well as numerous articles and presentations on free trade zones. So we're very happy to have him and to welcome him. Dr. Mohan, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Fanta, for that wonderful introduction. A very good evening from Dubai, and of course, good morning for the rest of you. A very warm welcome into this seminar. It gives me great pleasure to be here connected with all of you and share some thoughts and experiences. I represent World Free Zones Organization. We are an apex body acting as the voice of all the 3,000 plus free trade zones and special economic zones around the world. We are registered in Geneva and headquartered in Dubai, operational since last 7 years. And as we move on, talk more about our organization. So this is the topic on which we are going to discuss today. We have about 800 plus members from 140 plus countries, truly a global network and a representation of all the zones in the world. We have over 10 active regional offices, 40 plus what we call national contact points. And all these contribute a lot in the development of the free zone. We have 3 major activities. We do knowledge management, where we conduct research, do publications. We do consultancy at both the government as well as free zone authority level. And we do a number of capability development programs. The second activity we have is networking. We have our annual conference. We have regional events where all our members and others from the ecosystem get together, learn from each other, benchmark, and network in terms of synergistically trying to learn. And of course, the third area of activity is to provide a number of value-added services to our members. Now, one of the initiatives within that value-added service is what we call Free Zone of the Future, we have a number of services, about a dozen plus. But one of the key initiatives, we call it Free Zone 4.0. How it started about 4 years ago, we conducted a research project. We called it Next Practices Beyond Best Practices. It was based on the presumption that what is best today may not be best tomorrow. How do we anticipate what is in store for us? And how do we proactively plan and prepare ourselves to face those challenges? As part of this research initiative, I interviewed over 20 domain experts around the globe, picked their brain, and the findings from their output, along with our in-house research, resulted in a framework on Free Zone 4.0. As you see, it has 3 pillars, and each pillar has 3 elements in it. And we have sustainability, under which we have an environmental friendly zone, also called green zone, a socially responsible zone, and a good place to work, which follows ILO's decent work agenda. Under innovation, we have innovative zones. We have SME development, meaning 75 to 80% of the companies registered in most free zones across the globe are small and medium enterprises. So we work closely with International Trading Center, ITC, to see how we could develop SMEs. And of course, today's entrepreneur becomes tomorrow's SME. Today's SME becomes tomorrow's large organization. So we also focus on entrepreneurial development, including hand-holding free zones in establishing an incubation center. Now, when it comes to best in class, we have a knowledge-based input, which focuses on training and education. We are also very soon coming up with what we'll call a free zone MBA program. We have a tech-ready zone or smart zone. Now, most importantly, why I left this to the last is the safe zone, which is very much connected with the topic of our discussion. How the safe zone concept started. Again, about 4 years ago, in one of our annual conferences, we conducted a brainstorming workshop. And this workshop had participants at a very senior level from various multilateral entities. We had from World Trade Organization, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, World Customs Organization, OECD, and we brainstormed together on a topic which I prefer calling promoting legitimate trade in free trade zones. I prefer, rather than saying combating illicit trade, how can we promote legitimate trade? And Safe Zone is one such product which enables us to promote this. Now, it is, of course, very important to highlight what are the types of illicit trade, how much of damage or impact it creates in each of the areas, how it affects the global economy and humanity in general. These statistics are important, but I feel what is more important is what kind of action are we taking to really address this. And these actions can be generally looked at from 2 perspectives. One, of course, is the corrective action, wherein we say we need to identify who are the culprits and punish them. But more importantly, rather most importantly, a preventive action where how can we create an environment? How can we create an ambience which promotes and facilitates legitimate trade? This was the focus of our discussion. This gives a positive spin to the whole topic that we are discussing today. And I'm sure my fellow distinguished speakers, apart from highlighting the damage, the number of illicit trade, etc., are going to talk to us much more on what kind of preventive actions can we take to address and create an environment. I mean, I've been strategy head of port, customs, and free zone. And in customs, when we were looking at how to address customs is a regulatory body, tries to protect society and economy. We said we should not only do a proper inspection, ensure nothing untoward enters, but how can we create an ambience? How can we create an environment? Even in a global legal network conference recently that I spoke, 300-400 lawyers were looking at how can we formulate laws which will facilitate positive international trade, rather than only focusing on how to catch hold of the culprits and punish them. Of course, it is important, but I think what's more important is we all brainstorming how to create that positive environment. And I want to share with you that Safe Zone certification is one such move, one such initiative which helps us in creating that positive environment. All these 9 elements within the 3 pillars, each one is a certification. We are already ready with Green Zone, Safe Zone, and Tech Ready Zone. We are working on the innovative, and the others are getting developed. All of them follow a very simple framework. We have a pre-assessment questionnaire, which tells us where does the free zone stand as of today. And we have a progressive certification scheme. If on a 100-point scale, somebody gets 30, we say you're bronze certified. We provide inputs. At 50, they are silver. At 65, they are gold. 85, they are platinum. And they are certified as green or environmentally friendly zones. And the same approach we follow in Safe Zone. And my colleague Muriel, after me, will share with all of you a little more details of the Safe Zone certification process. So in general, I think we need to focus much more on creating environment to promote legitimate trade. And this framework has a base, which is, of course, business excellence and economic contribution. And our philosophy is if a zone gets certified from all the 9 elements, its contribution to the economy will also increase, will be enhanced. So it is what, while heading customs, I realized as a standalone, it's not very easy to combat. We thought we need an integrated approach. And this is where I appreciate INTA and World Free Zone integrating our resources. Probably we need to bring in more such entities who are stakeholders in our ecosystem to brainstorm and think of how to create that positive environment. So in customs, we said we need to look at Coast Guards, police, Ministry of Interior, Home Department, and how can we collectively address the system. So as I see, I have 3 major approaches given the limitation of 10-12 minutes. I just wanted to share 2 major thoughts. One, how to create positive environment. And 2 is going forward, we need an integrated approach, not just a standalone free zone taking ABC actions and we can win over this. No, we need, of course, free zones to strategically reorient them, look at all these 9 elements and particularly focus on Safe Zone. We need regulatory bodies to appropriately come up with policy reforms to promote legitimate trade. And we also need academic institutions to repackage their value propositions. I mean, a lot of accreditation agencies are insisting that if if a university needs to be accredited, don't just teach them how to generate more revenue, how to make more profit. How can they come with an ethical sustainability perspective in their learning? So the environmental, social, and governance perspective to learning. In a way, it has to be a three-pronged approach of free zones taking actions, regulatory bodies providing a compatible reform which helps in creating and promoting legitimate trade, and the development system, educational development, which builds future capabilities, has to inculcate those value propositions of ESG, ethics, and sustainability. So this is a kind of comprehensive approach, two key messages that I wanted to share with all of you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the rest of the speakers. Back to you, Fanta, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohan. That was very interesting start to the webinar, and I love your approach about taking this from a positive, looking to set a positive environment. Thanks very much for that. Now I'm going to introduce our next speaker. I have the pleasure of introducing Muriel FZO. She is the Safe Zone Project Manager at World Free Zones Organization. Muriel has over 14 years experience in business development management and private banking sector, as well as research and analysis, client portfolio, and client relationship management. At the World Free Zones Organization, she manages the overall functioning of the certifications program, including signing up for certification, promoting the program and securing financing. The certification program, as was mentioned before by Dr. Mohan, really has an integral part to the World Free Zone Organization's objectives in supporting free zones. Muriel, I hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fanta. Great presentation. Thank you, Dr. Mohan, for as well your excellent presentation on World Free Zone Organization services and vision. Before I start, I would like to give a special thank you to International Trademark Association. It's our first joint policy dialogue, and hopefully many more to come. I'm truly honored to have worked with Fanta Punch and Tiffany Fo on this project. So before I start, I would like to share with you the teaser of our Safe Zone certification program.
Did you know 25% of global trade goes through thousands of free zones around the world? As the only international organization that unites free zones on a global platform, the World Free Zones Organization is committed towards building a seamless supply value chain. In this time of global challenges, there is an increased demand for transparency and compliance in international trade to facilitate economic recovery. But how do we make sure that the trade zones do not harbor illicit trade? The World FZO is proud to introduce Safe Zone, a voluntary certification program that will help build trust and promote transparency in the supply chain system within the standards of World Customs Organization's Authorized Economic Operators concept and World Trade Organization's Trade Facilitation Agreement. The certification offers unique advantages that will give you the competitive edge needed for accelerated growth. Amplify your security compliance with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Code of Conduct for Clean Free Trade Zones, the backbone of this program. Enjoy guaranteed impartial validation from internationally vetted third-party inspections. Take up the responsibility of being a stakeholder in the supply chain and eliminate illicit activities. A certified Safe Zone is your future partner of trust.
Thank you. As I was saying, as the only global association for free zones, we are actively following the work of multilateral organizations such as OECD and Interpol on solutions to solve illicit trade problems within free zones. The first step, as Dr. Mohan mentioned it, was taken when we launched the Safe Zone certification program in 2019 with our partner, Lars Carlson from KGH Customs Services, which is based on the OECD Code of Conduct for Clean Free Trade Zones, follows the World Customs Organization Safe Frameworks Authorized Economic Operator concept, and the authorized operator model in the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement. So it has been endorsed by our free zone members who signed our security declaration. As a reminder, the Safe Zone has been developed as a specific compliance management program, addressed and promote the quality, integrity, and transparency, and the protection of free zones. Thank you so much for your attention. Fanta, I will give you back the floor.
Thanks very much, Muriel. And thanks very much for sharing with us about the Safe Zone project, which we hope to see more and more countries get involved with. Our next speaker is David Luna, who is the CEO and President of Luna Global Networks and Convergence Strategies. David is also, in addition to his role at Luna Global Networks, he is also founder and executive director of the International Coalition Against Illicit Economies, and does quite a lot of work in helping to tackle some of the most pressing security threats and governance challenges across the digital world, borders, markets, and industries through convergence strategies that target illicit environments. David is also chair of the business at OECD Anti-Illicit Trade Expert Group. He is chair of the AIT Committee of the US Council for International Business, a board member of the United Nations Association, NCA, senior fellow for national security and director of Anti-Illicit Trade Institute Terrorism Transnational Crime Corruption Center based at the George Mason University. So we're very fortunate to have him here with us today. David, I'd like to hand over to you now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Benta, for the introduction. Let me thank the World Free Zone Organization and the International Trademark Association for hosting today's webinar and for their leadership over the years through public partnerships on countering the illicit trade. Having worked with the FZO and INTA and other partners, I find these issues are becoming more and more important. But I also think that given the breadth and scale of the threat posed by illicit trade and illicit economies, we need to recalibrate our approaches. We need to assess what has worked, what didn't work, so that we can better leverage our energies and pivot to newer innovations and capabilities. I think we need to see the challenge not only within free trade zones as unique trade hubs or fixed points on the map, but extend a coordinated anti-illicit trade response beyond their localized coordinates. This will become even more important, and this is why I think we need to really disrupt the illicit trade on all cylinders and coordinate our various approaches and strategies across sectors. So a lot to unpack in 10 slides, but here we go. To the illicit trade, I mean, we've heard a little bit about the scale of the illicit trade, as the good doctor was mentioning. And you can just see the volume when we're talking about $19 trillion of global trade being exported every year. That is really significant. As we heard, also 90% of that trade is through maritime containers, and obviously 25% of that through free trade zones. But not all is positive. Yes, it is true that free trade zones are a benefit to many economies, from expanding economic growth to prosperity. But in too many places, they are also exploited daily by too many bad actors and criminal organizations. So as we go from the illicit to the illicit, the global illicit threat environment, we can really begin to see really how much illicit, how much dirty money is really traveling around the world. Not only from counterfeits and fake goods, the 509 billion, it's an OECD figure. We heard INTA with the almost as twice as much. But you see other illicit markets, from transnational crime to narcotics and illicit opioids trafficking, environmental crime, human trafficking, illicit tobacco. And it's not like any one of these threats are isolated or in a specific market or in a specific region. This is a global threat. So when we look at illicit pathways, not only free trade zones, I think we also need to be looking at ports, again, across supply, transit, and demand markets, because what begins at point A transits through point B, impacts many economies across different points, across supply chains, value chains, and obviously the overall global trade ecosystems. But the issue of corruption, I think, is something that we really need to integrate more into our strategies, because in my experience working with the OECD, working with FZO, with Interpol, with the G7, I do think that the issue of corruption is not only systemic, but really helps to fuel a lot of the illicit trade across free trade zones. So again, it helps, it weakens efforts to combat our overall trafficking crimes. It impedes our law enforcement to be able to better detect, deter, and reduce illicit trade. And again, in free trade zones, it enables the operators and criminals to take advantage of the inadequate oversight, the lack of control, lack of transparency. So again, I'm a big believer of strategic intelligence, of doing overlays between markets, between specific illicit threats, because in the global environment, they're interconnected. And we heard earlier about the issue of crime convergence. If we go back to the earlier slide, where you do see not only ports, but free trade zones, if you were to overlay the Transparency International Global Index on corruption, you do begin to recognize why, again, issues of illicit trade, issues of money laundering have to be looked at, as the good doctor said, really holistically, systemically, from one free trade zone to another, from all of these different ports that are contributing to the overall global illicit trade. So when we get into these vulnerabilities, high levels of corruption, money laundering, and in some instances terrorist finance, are weakening the ability to implement a lot of the good standards, a lot of the good strategies that we all would like to see. The good work by the WCO, by the OECD, the World Free Zones organizations are really undermined when we don't begin to really put the pressure on government, free trade zones operators to take these illicit trade issues more seriously. I do think an issue of coordination and cooperation between free trade zones and law enforcement authorities, specifically customs, needs to be enhanced, because otherwise we are creating these ripe, safe havens for kleptocrats, money launderers, terrorist financiers, and other bad actors to continue to exploit free trade zones. So as the first chair of the OECD, and I'm really delighted there's a lot of members of the OECD task force joining us for this webinar. We took this issue very seriously within the task force from year one. And the more we did some of these evidence-based research, we did find the data to really ascertain or to point out that free trade does increase, illicit trade increases more with more free trade zones, especially those that are unregulated, where there is lack of transparency, or there's lack of enforcement. The issues of corruption, again, are very prominent, not only in free trade zones, but it helps to increase the overall market share of fake goods. So once we started getting these evidence-based research and good data, we launched through the task force consultations across sectors on developing this OECD recommendation, which the council approved in 2019. With that, it includes the OECD Code of Conduct for clean free trade zones. And there's work that continues on this very important initiative by the OECD. The recommendation is not binding, it is to jurisdiction within members of the OECD and even to non-members. Again, the Code of Conduct lays out various elements, conditions on how administrators within free trade zones can meet various responsibilities to ensure greater clean free trade zones. We're working with experts from the testing, inspection, and certification industry and really developing further guidance as it relates to the OECD recommendation and code of conduct. And as the chair of the business at OECD, Anti-Illicit Trade Expert Group, we're really honored to be working with the OECD. And so on really the vulnerabilities and risk factors, whether it's RUSI, the Global Financial Integrity, many organizations have really developed good research as well that really distills some of these factors that are really contributing to the illicit spaces within free trade zones. From money laundering to trade-based money laundering, the issues of anonymous shell companies are very important. And this is why I think law enforcement and really encouraging our partners to be working on these risk factors becomes very important for better controls, compliance, and again, law enforcement across borders. So at ICAIA, we're working to develop really stronger public partnerships to ensure that we create innovative solutions with the partners to combat illicit trade across various markets, across borders. And these are some of the elements that we're developing, leveraging more technologies. It's important that we are able to use different capabilities so that we can enhance intelligence, so that we can develop better actionable information intelligence to provide to law enforcement. Again, technology, I think, is very important to be able to identify illicit spaces, to be able to determine where some of the corruption nodes, where the money laundering is happening, to be able to connect the dots better, including issues of trade-based money laundering, issues of forgery. And we are partnering with K2 Integrity under the Dolphin initiative, which is an information sharing platform, to be able to do more together with industry partners. I encourage you to learn more. I include more information, our website at ICAIA.org, so that we can hopefully do some pilot cases and working across industries to be able to disrupt these illicit networks. But I do think, again, that it is important to strengthen our information sharing capabilities to be able to do more damage to the bad guys or to disrupt and dismantle a lot of these illicit networks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for sharing with us some very detailed data on the extent of illicit economies globally. And I think your point is well made about the need to recalibrate, to use your words, the approach to illicit trade and where free trade zones sit in that to look at coordinating better approaches. So thanks very much for sharing that with us today. I want to move on now to our next speaker, Jacqueline Johnson. Jacqueline is the CEO of Kirundi NV in Curaao. As CEO, Jacqueline manages and oversees policy development and implementation within Kirundi, advising on the development of new fiscal and economic facilities, and as well as maintaining relationships for businesses who use Curaçao as an investment destination. Kirinde carries responsibility for 3 business parks and has a customer base of 200 establishments. We're very happy to have Jacqueline with us today, so I'd like to hand over to her now.
Thank you, Fanta. Thank you for this opportunity also to the World Free Zone Organization, all involved in the organization also. And I have to say, I'm very impressed about the testimonial that I heard, Dr. Mohan, and after that, David also. This morning, I want to just share with you what we did in the past and how we see this issue. And I like to maintain with a positive attitude, because this is the way when you want to sell the information and when you want to educate people about illicit trade, etc. Okay, Curacao, I think we have a beautiful island that is located in the Caribbean. And through Curacao, we can do so many things, deal with businesses, activities, and legal practices, and the hub function that we can have here through Curacao, dealing with other countries. I will mention some things about Curaçao, a well-developed harbor. This is important for doing business. Benefits related to the OECD treatment, a state and art telecommunication infrastructure, high standard education of the people, and autonomous country within the Dutch of the Kingdom. I will be talking a little bit about our vision. Here it starts. When you want to achieve something, you have to have your vision very clear, with determination and the mission. Our portfolio, counterfeit issues, and international certification, also very important here, because this is the way to continue in the correct way doing the business. Okay, our vision. We started to put for our condition as a company to be an internationally recognized facilitator and service provider in Curaçao. When you state this vision, you are going to work on it in the sense that you cannot accept anything else than what you are mentioning here. A management company with international production and trade of high value goods. When we are talking about high value goods, we don't have space for other things, okay? Our mission, stay attracting, assisting, stimulating production trading companies to reach their goals, and the most important objective, stay in the line, stay with contributing to the economy of Curaçao, but legally. Important also to mention here that we report to the United Nations yearly. This is also a way to stay in line with what is correct, dealing with the United Nations. Our portfolio, we manage 3 business parks, 2 free zones, economic zones, and 1 industrial park. If you can notice here at the Harbor Free Zone, we see a decline in companies. In the past, we have 100 companies. Now we are talking about 56 companies. But this is the consequences when you deal with illicit practices. You have to maintain focus. You are going to lose companies, but this will take a little bit time so that you can achieve other companies to come over and establish the ones that you want to achieve to be in your part. The contribution to the economy of Curaçao, creating employment, that is very important, and also the way that we contribute to the GDP of Curaçao. Okay, what is the experiences that we have, the decline of the businesses? I already talked about this. It's not only losing company, but it also losing revenues for the companies. This means that you have to make a choice between getting good results for the company or maintain the good image that you want to maintain to attract other companies to come over. This is a very ticklish point. Why? Because sometimes you got government people, they come to you and they ask you, but you are losing money. It's correct. We are now losing money due to the fact that we handle with the issue. But in the future, we want to achieve more companies to increase the revenues of the companies. Okay, this is what we did in the past. I think the best solution is to get international backup so that you can handle with the illicit practices. And the most important thing that we did is signing an MOU. We started with the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition, but now you see we are working also with the INTA. This means that all the stakeholders that you can get on board to help you handling with the issues, please give them a golden hand because you need them. Involve the government, especially the Minister of Economic Affairs. Important prosecutor officer is also an important bureau to be involved, because they are the one that can say to the clients, okay, this is going to happen if you stay in illicit practices. Give training to the people, especially customs department. Why? Because sometimes people don't recognize illicit products. You see the products coming in your island, but if you cannot recognize the product, then you cannot make for sure this is an illicit product coming in. Stay in contact with the clients, give them information. In our case, we give the clients, due to the fact that this was taking for so many years, it was happening here in our business park, give them the chance to make the transition. It can be 1 year, 9 months, but give them the chance to make the change. On the way, you notice that some companies, they can survive in the sense that they can come with their own brand. They can be a representative of a brand, but you can also find companies that they have to leave the business park. Don't feel regret about that, because no other choice. Okay, training, here we can see what we did with the Customs Department together with the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition. The prosecutor office also involved, Ministry of Justice. This is also a ministry that has to be involved, and talking about all the times with the brand owners, because the brand owners, they can show you how to recognize the illicit product. Okay, use your media. You have them. It is free. Use them. This is important. Why? Because the consumer of the products, they have to be aware what can be the consequences if they buy illicit product. You have to educate the population, not only doing your thing here inside, but communicate with the consumer, let them see the effect that it can have if they buy the counterfeit product. And I agree with David, because David showed a very nice graphic. What is the implication when you have the contribution to the counterfeit products? What will be the end result of that? Okay, this is the way that we start working, and now I'm entering in a session that is very important also. Operational daily activities, you have to have the right people in place to do that for you. We cannot do anything or everything ourselves. We have to achieve a good team to provide you the service that you need in your business parks. Here I'm talking about a very professional security team, because they are daily in the business parks. They can see, they can notice. And I have to mention here, the CEO of the team of security is an ex-police officer. Things that he noticed, I cannot be assured that that is the way of dealing with illicit practices, in the sense that the knowledge that they have is not the mine. Okay, very important. Get the necessary training, get the necessary certification. If you can notice here, they have the ISO 18788. It's very important to mention here, they are the only security company in the Caribbean certified with this ISO certification. Safety environment also, we have a team that are dedicated, fully dedicated, making the inspections in all the units that we have. This is also important because sometimes clients, they don't worry about certain things. No, the safety group, they are in the field to control everything so that you can maintain a safe zone. Safe zone is not only talking about that, but it is also doing your best, trying to maintain a safe environment daily in the daily operation. Okay, points of attention. I will start with OECD recommendation and changes. You have to comply with them, do that. Okay, maintain a good relationship with bank institutions. Why? It is known for everyone now that bank institutions, when they hear the name free zone, they are like, oh, very carefully, we have to deal with free zone companies. No, that is not a good impression. That's why you have to stay in contact with them, and not every client is dealing with illicit practices. Don't generalize the client's attitude also. COVID aspects, this also train us and maintain us in the sense that vital products came from our business parks. We are very proud of that due to the fact that more production activities brings you to this end result. Contribution to the GDP, 5% in our case. The stakeholders involved, very important: customs, security team, Corinda, and the clients. You have to stay in contact with your customs department, otherwise you cannot do the necessary controls. They have to inform you what is going on. Also, the security team, a good cooperation with our customs department. Compliance, ISO certification, Corinda have the 28001, and as I mentioned, Curaao is our security team, the 18788. The next thing is to get the anti-bribery certification, that is the 37001. It's very important to stay in line, to stay in compliance with the regulations, with the procedures, etc., etc. And last but not least, the OEA. It's very important also to comply with all the regulations, but give more efficiency, especially for what regard to the customs operation, daily operation. That is the most important thing we want to achieve, at least. Yeah, this is information about, okay, what they can provide you if you have those certification. International organizations, like I mentioned, you have to stay in contact with them. The International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition, the ASFA Association, the organization, they have the contact with more free zone organization, as well as World Free Zone Organization. Very important to stay in contact, to have those people behind you when you want to tackle these issues. The EAS is the organization that help us with ISO certification, and also are guiding us for the OEA authorization certification that we want to achieve. And I have to mention here that The organization of the EAS is a member of the ICOCA. Very important information also to mention. Okay, the confiscation of counterfeit goods are enhanced or go through the custom department, and the prosecutor office, they will give the sign what to do with the confiscation of the goods. Maybe it will be destroyment or other things that can happen with that. But very important to stay close to them so that when the action has to be taken, do it. Okay, and for us, it was an honor to receive this international award. I think for so many years we were been working on this, and this was the satisfaction for us to receive the international award of the best free economic zone manager in the Dutch Caribbean. I think Mr. Mohan also mentioned some things about how to educate and how to be positive. I think giving such as prizes, giving such recognitions help you to continue doing your best, because you have to let the world know what you have done and where you are and where you want to be. Okay, conclusions. I will just highlight the two that I have. I think for us here is very important. Introduce the business conduct manual for all the free zones. People that know me know what I'm thinking about unfair competition. Unfair competitions means that we can have so many free zones around the world, but if Curaao did her best changing things, please, we have to be in fair competition with others. That means that others cannot continue dealing with illicit practices. Maybe I'm talking for them, but I think we have to stimulate people to be on the right track if we want to continue with our free zones in the future. Otherwise, it can be a change in the sense that we don't have the trust when we deal with free zone companies. And that is not the way of focusing on the future. And the last thing, educate the merchants, respect for intellectual property, share intelligence, and also educate the consumer of the products. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jacqueline, for that presentation. It was very, very useful information. I think the point that you made very clearly is the importance of creating a hostile environment for any sort of illicit trade activity and sticking by, you know, what the correct approaches ought to be for all stakeholders, and also, you know, the collaborative element or aspect of how you and Kurundi continue with that. So thanks very much for that. I'm just going to move on now to our next speaker, Nicholas Orte. Nicholas is the Director ITP at Philip Morris International. He is the Global Head, Business Development and Operations for the Illicit Trade Prevention Department at Philip Morris International. Nicholas has led several assignments against the threat of illicit trade around the world, in Africa, in the Far East, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean on behalf of Philip Morris. In his current role, Nicholas works closely with government agencies, the business community, other stakeholders in tackling the significant challenges generated by the trafficking of illicit goods and its derived crimes. And he leads Philip Morris's global efforts on research, forensics, investigations, enforcement, and communications against illicit trade. Again, very, very fortunate that we have him with us today. So Nicholas, if I can hand over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon. I was thanking the International Trademark Association and the World Free Zone Organization for putting together this event. It's a virtual one, but it's an important dialogue to have. It's also an honor to be speaking among such distinguished panelists. I think we heard a lot, and I'm very proud. Maybe a couple of words about my company. Philip Morris International, for those who don't know it, is a leading international tobacco company engaged in the manufacture and sale of cigarettes, as well as smoke-free products, electronic devices and accessories, and other nicotine-containing products in markets outside the US. Over the recent years, we've been leading a transformation in the tobacco industry to create a smoke-free future and ultimately replace cigarettes with smoke-free products to the benefits of adults who would otherwise continue to smoke, the society, the company, shareholders, and stakeholders. For a start, I'd like to propose a video.
Illicit trade is a $1 trillion problem. It represents something like 5% of the global GDP. Drugs, arms, human trafficking, child slavery, prostitution, all that is being funded by the same source of money. The only way we can solve this problem is by creating an international cooperation.
To fight illicit trade is a very complex problem, so you need a comprehensive solution. There is no silver bullet, but public-private partnership is clearly one of the avenues, simply because organized crime is a network. So you need a network to fight another network. PMI Impact is an initiative that we started in 2016. We pledged $100 million to fund the projects coming from the private sector, from the public sector, from NGOs, international organizations, academia, in order to build a network of like-minded people and organizations in order to fight illicit trade. Since our launch, we continue to provide funds and assistance to organizations around the globe.
Let me make a first point, which I think is critical here. Free trade zones have proven to be a fantastic tool to foster economic development through trade facilitation. I think in anything we discuss today, we need to keep that in mind. We all benefited from it. Economic development, that also means business development, and we as a company also benefit from it. These play a vital role in global economic life, and particularly in some countries. They help attract international businesses to parts of the world where they might normally not come to. However, what we've seen in the recent years is that organized crime groups have found their ways into these zones, some of them, and they've managed to find ways to exploit and abuse free zone and trade facilitation to move their illicit products. And that goes around the world. Therefore, without much detection. There are a few enablers to illicit trade. One of them is the vulnerabilities of free trade zones, and they need to be addressed. How? Well, first of all, by implementing regulations to control the movement and transactions, sensitive goods, strengthening the sanctions, and all that needs to be done. However, to my first point, while preserving the benefits of free trade. This is absolutely important. Priority in all that should be to protect products, consumers around the world. Now, we all want to see free trade zones grow, including my company. And we want legitimate trade to thrive. We is who? We is free trade zone operators, shipping companies, logistic companies, brand owners, customs, the whole economies of countries. And that's why we think that all actors involved in business activities need to be constantly vigilant and committed to preventing criminals from abusing those free zones. Free zones, again, a fantastic tool for economic development. Now, let's be clear. Illicit trade, it affects all of us. It affects black market, affects legitimate companies like ours, which is why I'm speaking today, but also deeply impacts government revenues. When it impacts government revenues, it necessarily mechanically impacts taxpayers. Many of us here, I'm sure, are taxpayers. but it also impacts consumers who are cheated with illicit goods and the society as a whole as a result. Now, if we take a bit of perspective and try to frame today's discussion in today's context, there's an additional challenge, which is the economic challenges resulting from the global pandemic. I saw a couple of numbers that I thought would be of interest for today. Governments are providing massive fiscal support to protect firms, households, and vulnerable populations. The amount spent since March 2020 by governments equals $12 trillion US. Now the number is, in that same period, the year 2020, an additional 95 million people have entered the ranks of extreme poverty around the world. This is very concerning. But it also means that the world, governments, but the world in general, is in desperate needs for financial resources. And on the other hand, we have criminal organizations who see an opportunity and by seizing it, pose a significant threat to national and international security. And how do they do that? They simply feed off illicit trade. Let me give you some numbers on illicit trade. The OECD issued a report last year stating that in 2019, about $464 billion US worth of counterfeit and pirated goods was circulating throughout the year. That is the equivalent of approximately 2.5%. I mean, there are the numbers that would say 5%, as I've heard from some of my fellow panelists. 2.5%, 5%, it's huge. Yeah, it is simply huge. The Munich Security Conference issued another report on illicit flows resulting from cross-border criminal operations. And they looked at the smuggling of a number of things, including arms, tobacco, pharmaceuticals. And their estimate is anything between 1.6 and 2.2 trillion US dollar annually worth of merchandise. Okay, these are big numbers. I personally, they don't relate much to me. I'm an employed salaried at the multinational. 2.2 trillion doesn't, resonate much. Just to have an idea, if it was a country, if illicit trade was a country, its economy would be larger than Brazil, Italy, and Canada. Last number, which is staggering, the World Economic Forum estimates at about 2.2 trillion US dollar that are currently lost in economic growth due to illicit trade. Now, with all these numbers, why does PMI, Philip Morris, care? It's a question that comes very often, but the answer is very simple. We care because it's an international, global, organized crime. It's a global criminal enterprise. Criminals don't discriminate in the goods that they trade illegally every day. They smuggle illegal goods across borders, establish illegal operations in fully monitored zones that disrupt legitimate businesses such as ours, and they destabilize communities and countries around the world. It's very often orchestrated by groups which also are involved in terrorism financing, which we've seen in some regions, human trafficking, producing, smuggling other fake goods, not just tobacco. They are multi-products. They also do drugs, weapons. They even smuggle illegally mined natural resources. And unfortunately, for us, criminals are also very increasingly attracted to the high profits and minimal risks associated with trafficking illegal cigarettes. I referred to a study made by the OECD recently. They studied, within their report, they studied the top 20 industries targeted by smugglers and counterfeiters, and tobacco industry was number 8. So you can imagine why this is such an important topic for us at PMI. These illegal cigarettes are among the most trafficked goods in the world. Just to give you an idea, a sense of volume, what we're talking about. we're talking about 400 to 600 billion cigarettes commercialized illegally. Okay, you might argue, what does that mean in volume? Or it's huge. It's the equivalent of 1 out of 10 cigarettes sold annually. 1 out of 10. Department of State in the US also estimated that this represents a loss of about 40 to 50 billion annually. I want to make a reference. The IMF Director General recently mentioned that they would need something about 50 billion US dollar in order to vaccinate the whole world. I think these are things we're talking about when we talk about illicit tobacco. So as a result, it's a priority for us. The consequences associated with the illicit trade go way beyond our product, one company or one industry, and they have dire negative consequences into international security and sustainability. Now, one has to recognize that things are moving. There are good progress made in some areas. I'm going to take a couple of examples. One is the Panama resolution that was published back in April 2019. It introduces measures to facilitate legitimate trade, transparency, secure the exchange of information between the colon-free zone administration, the companies, the economic operators in the free zone, and government entities such as customs. I think we should praise those initiatives. The regulation is there. What we need to focus on now is the implementation, the full implementation of this resolution, which certainly goes in the right direction. And for that, we need to work together, not just the administration on one side, the government on the other side, and the economic operators on the other side. It's all together that we can have a successful implementation of that sort of regulation. Another initiative was explained today by Dr. Mohan, Ms. Curaao, right after, is the Safe Zone program of the World Free Zone Organization. I think we should applaud that. It's what is it? With the perspective of the private sector, such as ourselves here, the World Free Zone Organization Safe Zone program is nothing but an example of how various actors and players can come together, work together towards ensuring a more sustainable future for free trade zones. In effect, increasing regulation means attracting more legitimate businesses, which at the end of the day are the real source of sustainable revenue and profits for free trade zones. These are good signs. This is clear progress, but more needs to be done. Organized crime groups have found ways in which free zones can be exploited to move their illicit products around the world, avoid detection. They take advantage of free zone regimes through different modus operandi. Let me give you a very concrete example. A couple of years ago, a few years ago, there were two 40-foot containers that left the free zone of Jebel Ali under one bill of lading. So nothing, no issue here. They were declared as cigarettes. They went to the free zone of Singapore. They arrived there 15 days later. And a bit later, a few days after, 4 days exactly, these same two containers were shipped back out of the free zone, this time under two different bills of lading. These two containers arrived in a port in Greece, and when they were inspected, these containers, which on these new bills of lading were declared not as cigarettes anymore, but as blankets, were inspected and actually revealed a total of 20 million illicit cigarettes. Just to give you an idea, with that amount of cigarettes, we're talking about customs duties evaded to a rate of 3.8 million euros. 3.8 million euros just with these two containers. Now, you see a map behind me. What happened? The goods went from here here in Singapore, and then buy here in Greece. Why? If not to disguise the origin of the goods. This is public case, and that's why I make reference to it today. How do we tackle that? We need to work together with private sector expertise, World Free Zone organizations, the frameworks that are put in place, tools that are then implemented by the administrations of free zones together with law enforcement. We need to work together on this issue. Another interesting fact is this very same OECD report, which is really an excellent read, which I recommend to everyone, states that the exports of counterfeit and pirated goods from a country or economy rise in parallel with the number and size of free zones it hosts. It also reads, every new free trade zone established comes with 5.9% increase in value of counterfeit exports. This is very disturbing. It's a staggering number, 5.9% on average. If we look at our own experience, talking to law enforcement, other brand owners across different industries, with specialists in IP, and one comes just after me as a speaker, there are a few hotspots, and they match the biggest free zones. You have some in the UAE, in Singapore, in Panama, Belize, just to name a few. And it's not about pointing a finger. It's about saying the private sector is here and shall work with the free zone administrations, the governments, and the civil society to help make that better, to help make legitimate business thrive, not the illegal one. More needs to be done. One key North Pole has become the OECD Code of Conduct that David made reference to. This is a cornerstone on the way to better regulated free zones and more legitimate business in free zones. I would cite 4 main points from the Code of Conduct. One is the implementation of supply chain controls, including licensing, labeling compliance, and due diligence. Know your customer, as it is otherwise known. National authorities, and especially customs, should have ex officio monitoring and oversight in free zones. Digital records should be maintained of all shipments of goods coming in and going out. And then what comes in and what goes out has to be reconciled. And if it doesn't match, it should be inquired. And last but not least, we need to look at deterring cash payments for commercial and financial transactions within the free zone. And these transactions should be recorded, again, to help transparency and make sure that there's no hiding from detection. As a conclusion, you heard during the video, we need a network to fight the network. We need those public-private partnerships to exchange information, assess the data, put the evidence on the table, and make recommendations on the most efficient solutions to fight illicit trade. We need more policies and self-regulations. The World Free Zone Organization offers a framework. The Panama resolution offers a good hope. That's the direction we should go towards. And the OECD clearly gives a North Pole as to where we should be all going and working together. Number 2, as I mentioned, regulation. But number 3, more importantly, we need these policies and regulations to be actually enforced. Because without enforcement, all of this becomes pointless. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Nicholas. That was very, thanks a lot for your sharing with us your thoughts on this issue, particularly, while underscoring the benefits of free trade zones as economic centers, the equivalent relevance of the need to focus, to focus on just stopping some of this criminal activity that's going through the same zones, and the loss that governments are experiencing compared with the profits that are being made by these criminal actors as they were. So thanks very much for that. That's very helpful to us all. I want to now introduce quite briefly our last special guest, Mr. Hugo Moran of Moran IP in Panama. Hugo is the founding partner of Moran IP. He's a specialized IP litigation attorney with more than 20 years of experience in prosecution and anti-counterfeiting matters. Hugo has an in-depth understanding and experience in dealing with the judicial system and is an expert on some of the trends and precedents that occur in the Panamanian IP courts. So Hugo, if I can hand over to you now.
Thank you, Fanta, and good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank to INTA and the World Trade Zone Organization for inviting me to this policy dialogue discussion. As I told to Tiffany and Fanta a couple of months ago when they were planning this discussion, if you want to discuss about illicit trade and counterfeiting, it is mandatory to mention the role of the Colón Free Zone, not only because it's the largest free trade zone in Latin America, but also it's because it's a key logistics hub for many brand owners that are using this trade facility. Well, the Colón Free Zone was created in 1948 by the President Enrique Jimenez. After the Second World War, President Jimenez invited some businessmen that were located in Jamaica and other countries in Latin America in this new journey. The Colón Free Zone is located in Colón City. It's like 80 kilometers approximately from Panama City. And it is the main free trade zone in the Western Hemisphere, second worldwide. And currently they are approximately like 1,900 companies that have carried out importation and exportation activity of all kinds of goods. Imagine from pencil to cars. In October 1969, a military regime took the power until December 20, 1989, with the departure of General Noriega. During the last year of the military dictatorship, the regime facilitated the abuse by companies doing business at the Colón Free Zone, who used the free zone to carry out money laundering activity and facilitate the import and export of counterfeit and the regional distribution of piracy software and movie. To give you an idea, at that time, the main competitor of Blockbuster, unfair competitor, was an individual that would link with companies at the Colón Free Zone. In April 1994, the Office of the United States Trade Representative issued the Special Report 301, in which classified Panama as a country with inadequate software protection and enforcement to prevent the transshipment of copyright and trademark infringement. What did Panama do to get out of the Special Report 301? The IP community, the IP lawyers, working together with Congressman, the Minister of Commerce, adopt the TRIPS recommendation and modify its IP legislation in connection with border measure. Through the Law 35 of 1996, the 1939 Industrial Property Law was abolished, and the new law established and grant power to the administration of the Colón Free Zone, to the Customs Authority, and to the IP prosecutor to carry out ex officio inspection and seizure of counterfeit and infringing goods. It's empowered this office to retain goods in transit at Panamanian port, and the new regulation, the new law, implement a custom recorder, not only in the Customs Office authority, but also at the administration of the Colón Free Zone. On the other hand, from 1996 to 2006, Panama modified the 1982 Penal Code and increased in 10 years the jail prison for the crime against industrial property right from 2 to 4 and then to 4 to 6 years. On the other hand, as Nicholas mentioned, to combat the illicit trade of cigarette and pharmaceutical goods, the Board of Directors of the Colon-Free Zone issued the Resolution 000 of 2019, which adopt a special permit for company to import, sell, export this type of products. The mentioned Resolution 008 established a mandatory special license, established the obligation to adopt the Know Your Client policy to all the companies doing business at the Colon-Free Zone, and create an executive committee with power to recommend to the Board of Directors of the administration of the Colon-Free Zone, sanction, fines, and suspension of the operation code of the infringing company. These laws were considered best practice in industrial property matter and have been served as a model law for the region. So let's see what is the current situation at this moment at the Colon-Free Zone, especially in COVID times. In terms of IP enforcement, the only office that carry out operation to tackle counterfeiting within the Colon-Free Zone are the IP prosecutor and the custom authority. They are doing an exceptional work to combat the illicit trade. Unfortunately, I have to say that since 2018, the Colon-Free Zone has not carried out ex-official operation to combat infringing of IP right. Also, the Resolution 008 of 2019 to combat the illicit trade of cigarette and pharmaceutical goods is enforced. It has not been implemented. Nicholas mentioned this in his presentation. In terms of cigarette, to give you an idea, in the middle of the COVID crisis, in 2020, more than 225,000 boxes were exported from the Colon-Free Zone, which were smuggled to other Latin American and the Caribbean countries. This year, from January to August, more than 260,000 boxes of cigarettes were exported. Keep in mind that one box contains approximately like 10,000 to 12,000 sticks of cigarette. Panama has been an example of good practice adopting IP regulation and legislation to combat illicit trade. Is because our geographical position. We are a country of transit, and the Colon-Free Zone is key to develop the country. However, in response to my initial question, unfortunately, I have to say that Panama is a clear example of the lack of compliance with industrial property law and to combat illicit trade by the authority that are in charge to supervising this free zone area. In my personal opinion, the lack of enforcement is more sensitive than the lack of regulation. Fortunately for us, the IP prosecutor and custom are doing their job to combat the illicit trade at the free trade zone, ports, and in-market. If Panama wants to develop the country as a logistic hub, they need to take care about this problem. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Hugo. That's very interesting case study on how in Panama the free trade zone is dealing with, or the Colon-Free Zone is dealing with the enforcement issue, even though it's done quite well on the implementing regulations and having those in place. So very, very interesting talk there. Thanks very much for that. I appreciate it. I'm conscious of the time, so we just have a few minutes for some questions that we have. If I could ask all the speakers very kindly to maybe just speak for about a minute, if that's possible, on the questions that we have coming in from the attendees. So Nicholas, maybe I can start with you if that's okay. If I can ask, what is Philip Morris doing to combat illicit trade?
It's a good question. Thank you, Fanta. As I mentioned, it's one of our priorities. The company has a dedicated global team. We fight illicit trade around the world, and we're investing a lot of resources to secure our supply chain, make sure our products don't get out of the legitimate supply chain, to raise awareness on the illegal tobacco trade. Not everybody understands how damaging it can be for the economy, the society, or government revenues, and to work on developing workable solutions, which is not easy. It's a complex, very complex issue. And us, despite what we do, cannot solve the problem alone. To work on illicit trade, we're also looking at systems to authenticate and secure our products. To Jacqueline's point on it is fundamental that everyone can detect suspicious products, and this is thanks to such technology. And I do think it's very important for us as well to make sure we constantly focus our efforts on working with public and private sector. As I mentioned, we can't work in silos. We have to work in network in order to defeat criminal networks. It's about information sharing, where we share intelligence on suspicious shipments, manufacturing operations, etc. It's technical assistance through trainings, as mentioned by Jacqueline, and once again, that is very important. You can't expect customs officials to work on a product they have no clue about. We need to make that undertaking and conduct those capability building programs as a company. We need to provide assistance in technical and forensic authentication, analysis of products. We need to go and do our job as a trademark owner to the courts. I think Mohan would vouch for that. This is absolutely critical. It's not about just a seizure, it's the seizure, and then you have to go through the whole proceeding to the end, the destruction of the products, the sanctions, and that's how you get to the deterrence. And again, for all that, it's about joining forces and resources. I think I'm over the minute, but I would just add one last point. You, I'm sure, picked up the reference to this initiative called PMI Impact. It's an initiative that was launched in 2016. And in essence, it's an initiative to support public, private, and NGO projects to tackle illicit trade, not of illicit tobacco, illicit trade in general. I do encourage you to take a look at that. And if you have good ideas, please look at the website. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nicholas. We appreciate it. David, if I could move to you and ask you just to briefly share with us, what are ways or solutions to more effectively counter illicit trade, including counterfeits in the free trade zones, and more importantly, from one free trade zone to another?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Nicholas pointed out a lot of good possible solutions. Among the reasons that free trade zones fail or fall victim to criminal exploitations are because of the weaknesses in governance, the weaknesses in information sharing. And one of the things that we're trying to do at Business at OECD, at IGAIA, is to how to leverage data, actionable intelligence, how to follow the money more, and how to strengthen information sharing mechanisms across sectors. And in one of my slides, I mentioned what IGAIA is doing in developing these full spectrum capabilities to really harness that collective intelligence, across trade and security landscapes. So we very much look forward to working with free trade zones, with governments to fight corruption, to fight money laundering, and from a political will perspective, to again put constructive pressure on governments to implement and enforce their laws. So we very much look to doing piloted actions with partners in industry and across sectors with governments. One last mention on training. The Anti-Illicit Trade Institute at the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center at George Mason University is having 2 courses this fall on a lot of these issues, on investigating counterfeits and pirated goods, including in free trade zones and following the money. And we're happy to send more information. And thank you for the question.
Thanks very much, David. Hugo, if I can come back to you and ask, for those countries with free trade zone regulations, do you recommend that the powers to inspect and retain infringing goods are in the hands of the authorities who supervise and control the area, or would it be in the hands of other authorities? How do you see that?
Yeah, Fanta, thank you. In those countries with lack of regulation, my recommendation is to keep the balance. And when I say keep the balance, it's not to grant the power to combat the illicit trade to only one governmental entity. You have to keep the balance and grant those power not only to the Free Trade Zone Administration, but also to the prosecutor, to law enforcement, to custom, because day by day, the commitment of some authorities change. So you need to keep the balance. And another recommendation, especially in those days, is to obligate to those companies that are doing business in free trade zone is to know your client. Who is the source? Who is their client? Who is their provider, the manufacturer? This is really important in order to avoid the illicit trade. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hugo. Very true. Jacqueline, if I can ask you, what do you think we can do to share intelligence and knowledge surrounding this issue of illicit trade?
Thank you, Fanta, for the question. I think the first thing is we have the figures. Fanta, you show some figures, and it is very important that everyone take notice how this is increasing. And when we share those figures, we can be more aware of the situation globally. That is the first thing I will suggest. And maybe it can be through the stakeholders that we are working with. For example, I am the one dealing with this in Curaçao. Okay, I will share this with the government people, for example, the custom department, because they have to be aware. That is the first thing. We have to continue with organizing such of conferences, training, and be more how you say that, go, for example, to schools. Yeah, not only to the people in the trade sector, but educate your young people about this. And I'm going to mention something, maybe it's a little bit crazy, the TikTok platform. On the TikTok platform, you got ladies, young people showing people, I buy this, and this is the original product. See the difference? Very simple, but we have to involve them in those things. And Nicolas mentioned something very important. This is not easy, but if we state a vision, we want to decrease and not increase the figures of illicit practices, we start on a point working on this. Thank you.
I agree with you 100%. Thanks for that. A real truism. I want to ask Muriel a question. Muriel, does the Safe Zone certification program, undertake the issue of anonymous shell companies within FTZs? Someone's asked that question.
Thank you so much, Fanta, for the question. I'm just going to take a minute. I know it's the end of the presentation now. So basically, the Safe Zone certification program has a process in itself. Like the free zone starts with an online application. There is a self-assessment questionnaire, then a security declaration. Behind there is a validation, on-site risk assessment. There would be a report. We will decide with the advisory committee and the report made by the third-party validator whether the free zone has a level 1 or level 2 safe zone certification program. And then there will be incident reporting and central analysis and behind the revalidation. So the safe zone certification program basically is a full compliance system, is a risk management. So it is, again, a voluntary compliance model for the free zone that includes a code of conduct of OECD for clean free trade zones, the security declaration that every tenant inside the free zone has to sign to say that they adhere as well to the safe zone security certification program and the OECD code of conduct. As well, there would be the validation inspection, incident reporting, and the most important as well, the whistleblower function that will allow any company to report any incident inside the free zone.
Great, thanks very much for clarifying that for us. We appreciate it. I just have one last question for Dr. Mohan. I know we're running out of time, so I will ask him to answer us as quickly and succinctly as I know he can. So Dr. Mohan, I have a question here for you. You mentioned some academic propositions, and the person asking the question is wondering if in planning, the World Free Zone Organization would be including trainings on IP, having as its purpose the respect for trademarks is the question, and best practices, and whether or not that might involve INTA as a resource for this academic planning. I promise the question is not from me.
Sure, thank you. I think one clear message which we are getting from all the domain experts and distinguished speakers is we need a collective, concerted, integrated approach in addressing this issue. And yes, there is definite scope for the two organizations to synergize and take this further. In fact, Safe Zone as a certification need to be looked at coupled with a tech-ready zone. You know, technology plays a bigger role in bringing out transparency. It has to be looked at with innovative zone, come up with new ideas in addressing this issue. Green zone. So how, when you do greenification, it can also, in a way, the criteria could overlap between all this. So Safe Zone covers all the resources and the entire value chain, right from inbound logistics to operations to outbound, within the business, man, money, machine, material, including intellectual property rights, goods, and so on. So it's a kind of comprehensive program which has key elements of authorized economic operator and the code of conduct, as Muriel said, and goes the full distance in trying to be as comprehensive as possible. Yeah, we have had about 5 of them in our pilot study, which have been successfully implemented, and we have a lot more of inquiries coming in. And certainly we could work with INTA to focus on this issue much more. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Mohan. So all that's left really for me to do is to thank everyone, all our speakers today, for a very exciting, informative webinar. I think I've learned quite a bit, and thanks everyone for taking part. I also want to take the time to thank everyone who attended today. I know we went over a little bit, but I think that every second has been worth it, because everything that we've heard here today has been really critical and important information to those of us interested in this fight against illicit trade within free trade zones, hoping to make it what it's supposed to be, which is a place to foster economic growth and development. So I thank you all very much. And once again, thanks to INTA and World Free Zone organizations for organizing this joint dialogue. Take care.
Thank you.